So we've got some follow-up items here. I'll go first. I've got two. One of them I did great. One of them I did awful. Care to guess which one is which?
I'm going to say that you were able to build out the ladder of importance, but when you went with get social, but maybe I'm wrong.
You are wrong. Yeah.
Good.
So I guess you haven't been on social media much. That's
I
okay.
have not. No, I have not.
No judgment here.
I
But
have not.
yeah, I have been successfully scheduling posts for social media ahead of time. I still want to do more with this, but I am publishing regularly, and this was sort of necessitated by the Practical PKM cohort starting. So I kind of had to do it, but I feel like this is sustainable. Famous last words, I guess, because over the last week my queue has gotten down there quite a bit, and I need to create some new stuff. But yeah, so that has been successful. But building out the ladder of importance for my topic has not been something I've been able to set aside any time or mental resources towards. And I don't think that is probably going to happen until the cohort is over at this point. But I am going to be working with the same designer developer that updated the cohort page for updating
Yep.
the rest of the site. So it is going to be necessary for me to figure that stuff out in terms of giving them the what they need and to build out the sales pages. But yeah, that's not happening in the immediate future. How did you do?
I did terrible. Like absolutely horrible, terrible. So Mike, I mean, I don't even know if it's worth talking about them. I had to apply the belief ladder to the CCU engineering program and choosing engineering and then develop a ladder. Well, I guess it's just one really, kind of to develop the ladder for the CCU program. But like one of the things that I struggle with is when we get back into the semester, like the first, the week before the semester starts and then the first week or two of the semester. I mean, it's kind of like all hands on deck, go, 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 go. And then when you're not in that mode, like brain just shuts down, right? So the fact that I'm reading the books and like engaging in the books is like win. So here's the intervention question, Mike, which we've had multiple of these. I need a way to prioritize these action items, and I don't know how to do it. Like we've talked a little bit about this in the past. I don't know how, like, whether or not I should just not care about it, and it's like if it becomes important enough it'll happen, or if it's like I need to set aside a time, every week and be like, this is my bookworm action item, period of time, which I'm against that inherently. Like I more go on the philosophy of like, if this is important enough it'll bubble to the top, like
Sure.
it's going to rise to the top. But I also don't know if that's right. Like if I should schedule some time in there. So I need to think about that. I need to figure it out. One of the things I wanted to tell you about your action item, maybe this will help me too. Maybe we need to schedule like a half-hour working session, right? That is, our bookworm action items or whatever it might be. It's like
Yeah.
the Cory Mike working session.
We need to figure out the details of this yet, but the library, my private community, we do these co-working calls, and a bunch of people show up. Christopher was someone who's been involved in my different cohorts and is now the community manager, actually hosts the calls, and he gets a bunch of people that show up every week. And maybe we could do something like that for Bookworm Pro listeners. I do think like having time set aside to work on things together is a cool idea, and
Yeah.
virtual tools make that easy. But we're still working out the details for that. Hopefully, we'll have something that we can announce by the next episode. We were working on something, and then it took a detour, and now we're back to the beginning, kind of. So, yeah, it's not that we've neglected this completely. There've been progress made, and then had to pivot. So, but that is something that we could certainly look into. The other thing is, I mentioned this to you, the group coaching stuff that I'm going to be doing, which this is related to your creative action item. But if you want some direct accountability, I mean, yeah, happy to provide that. maybe we just need some public shaming from the Bookworm
Yes.
Club listeners. I don't know. Or we could just, continue as is if you're fine with that too. Whatever.
Part of me is like, well, we read these things and like I actually think, okay, this is a good one. I should work on this. I should do that because I don't make action items just for fluff, like just to make action items. So I think like, okay, I should really work on this one, and then we finish recording. Life comes at me and overwhelms, and then I don't ever make it back to it. Which we'll probably get into some of this in the show today. But one of the things I did just write down is I just wrote down an action item that says lead the effort on the library co-working sessions. So one of my action items, not even from the book, is to lead the effort on the library co-working sessions. Now, Mike, before you get your hopes up, I'm really bad at following through on these action items. So maybe I'm trying to get you to help me be more accountable, but
okay,
we'll work on the action.
Let's just have a conversation about that. That'll be the action item. How about that?
Okay.
Because I think that one would be pretty easy to implement, especially based on some of the stuff that we had kind of talked about already. So.
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, we don't need to belabor your failed action items any longer. You want to just talk about today's book?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So today's book is Poor Charlie's Almanack. Who do you say this book is by the way?
Okay. This is a really good question because it's really kind of like an editorial book, right? Like, I mean, somebody brought some stuff together, added some commentary in and out of it. But the main gist of this talk is, or sorry, this book, you heard me kind of allude to it there. The main gist of this book is these 11 talks that Munger gave at these different places throughout the years, primarily through like the early 2000s. And then they brought in, and I'm forgetting the guy's name, I'm blanking on the guy's name right now, but the editor came in and he put them all together and wrapped them in a package and put it out as Poor Charlie's Almanack, which we're going to talk about the pros and cons of that, I'm sure, as we get into the book and into style and rating. But I think it's like authored by Charlie and friends and then edited by this other guy. Right. Like, and again, I'm blanking on his name.
So if you look it up on Amazon, the author, even though it says in parentheses editor, that's Peter Kaufman. So I don't know if there's different versions of Poor Charlie's Almanack, and that's a specific one that we read. But the Stripe.press version, which you made me aware of last episode, which is really well done.
Incredibly well.
Even if you read physical books all the time like I do, you need to check out this website. There's like little floating Charlie Munger balloons you can poke with your mouse and stuff like that. It's really cool. This website is amazing, and it's basically the entire book for free online. So great place to read it. There's also a lot of additional like photos and things. A lot of the things that they talk about are linked, and you click on them and it'll open up photos of those particular things. So that's a better resource, I think, for really grokking what is a summary of the website says, by the way, let me look up the whole title, The Essential Wit and Wisdom of Charles T. Munger. So it's really a book about Charles Munger, which is Warren Buffett's right-hand man, Berkshire Hathaway. The structure of the book is kind of different. There's a couple chapters at the beginning where, a portrait of Charles Munger, remembering the children on Charlie, the Munger approach to life learning and decision making, and then there's 11 talks, which is what you were alluding to.
Yep.
Things that he's said, different places. Some of them are, this is the talk that he gave at this place, but because this is really the life of Charlie Munger, and it's little snippets of these different things that he said at different moments in time, there's a lot of overlap. So it's been edited in a way where it's like, okay, Charlie talks about this stuff again here. It's a long book. It's like 350 pages, but it could have been a lot longer.
And let me, so a couple different things here. One, I really think that you gotta say Charlie Munger is the author of it. And the reason why, especially in the version I read, which I believe is the same version as that you read, he does the revised portion after each talk where he goes back in and says, and here's the update. And I think that really doubles down on the fact that he wrote this, and then he had a very strong hand in coming back and just kind of giving you an overview of it. Now, those aren't long. It's not like he takes that talk and like changes a bunch of stuff. It's mainly a page, half a page or something of like, and I've had this thought since, or I really want to drive this point home, or whatever it is. But I want to go back to something that we were talking about, the Stripe, the Press.Stripe book. I believe this is what iBooks was supposed to be. Do you remember iBooks and what they touted iBooks to be, like these interactive books where you could zoom in and zoom out, and there was multimedia built into them and presentations and stuff like within the book, and how amazing it was going to be? Like, I think this is the realization of what iBooks promised and never delivered. And I think
That's fair.
It's like incredible. Like I loved reading the Press.Stripe version of this book as compared to just the normal bound or even digital, form of the book. Like, I loved reading that version of this book.
Yeah, this is a really cool website. I read the physical version, and I still think that is a worthwhile addition to the collection. That in and of itself is actually a pretty beautiful book. But yeah, having it all available for free on this website is pretty cool. There's also the alternate formats on this website, so you can buy the actual book itself. There's the audiobook, so you can listen to it. And then there's what they call Berkshire mode. Did you click on that at all?
No, I didn't see Berkshire mode. Hold on, I gotta go in and check this out now.
Yeah, it's basically a really ugly website where all the text is on one page.
Nice.
I don't get the inside joke there about this being Berkshire mode, but
okay, hold on. How do I get to there? Where's the setting that says put it into Berkshire mode?
you don't see that in your web browser, huh? So if you go to the website, you've got the chapters on the left,
okay,
you've got the
down at
11
the bottom.
talks, and on the right, yeah, you've got alternate formats, and there's Berkshire mode, and that one just opens up a really ugly website. It's like Web 1.0 with all of the text.
My suspicion that ties into the fact that, like, Buffett eats a McMuffin every morning, and what does he want to drink? A Coke, right? Like, that's all he wants to drink is a Coke, right? So it's like a McMuffin and a Coke every day, and he's it's like he's reading the newspaper. That's Berkshire mode.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So this is again maybe a terrible pick for Bookworm, because we're gonna try and talk about a 350-page book and provide a summary, which is in and of itself a bunch of random thoughts from a bunch of different places at a bunch of different times in his life.
Yep.
So I have no idea, like, the structure for this episode. I've got the mind map, and it's broken down into the main chapters and then the 11 talks. I have in the outline all 11 talks, but because there's a lot of overlap, maybe we'll jump between them. I'm okay with that. I really think if you were to condense all of the talks, there's probably 5 or 6 like recurring themes that he ends up hitting a lot. But yeah, you ready to dive into the specifics?
Yeah, I am. I think my disclaimer to anybody who's thinking about reading this, right, and whether you decide to after our conversation or not, he's a pretty eccentric guy. And he's also an insanely famous eccentric guy. So it's like, whether or not you know him, or you've ever even heard of him or not, if you're interested in some of the quips, the wit, if what we talk about here kind of goes, oh, that'd be interesting to talk about. The other one would be really, really big into economics, psychology, and then just, I would say, like, general rational thinking. So it's like, while some of the stuff got really specific and personally wasn't really that relevant or interesting, like, I wasn't going into it going, man, I really want to read that, that talk. There were some general principles that you can get out of this. So it's like, if you're looking at this and you're like, Charlie Munger, I don't care, I don't even know who that is, kind of go into it with a little bit more of an open mind, especially after you listen. If you decide that, like, oh, okay, those are some pretty interesting thoughts. That would be my disclaimer before we get going.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Well, let's start by talking about the introductions. There's multiples here. There is a foreword by John Collison, who I did not look up. There's a foreword by Warren E. Buffett, so Charlie's business partner, basically, where Warren says some nice things about Charlie. And then there is a rebuttal by Charles T. Munger, where he responds to the nice things that Warren said, basically. And then there's an introduction by Peter D. Kaufman, who is the editor. I guess the foreword by John Collison, it sounds like this was a younger guy who got to know Charlie directly in his 20s and had the opportunity to meet him directly. This is the one where it says, there's the quote, "There's no better teacher than history in determining the future. There are answers worth billions of dollars in a $30 history book." And that's kind of the thought that I've heard other people talk about this book, how it's a very valuable business education in a book. Yes and no, in my opinion. Charlie had a bunch of success, and so those are the types of people you want to learn from. It's not as simple as just copying what they did, and he's not going to provide you a simple system on anything. So if you're tired of those books, kind of like I am, this is sort of a breath of fresh air. But also, this isn't one that you pick up because you're trying to solve a specific problem. This is one just because you're interested in the person and you want to find out more about them. And if you go into that with an open mind, I think you can learn a ton. And that's kind of what Peter Kaufman talks about in his introduction. These are all fairly short. I actually don't have any notes on these in my mind map. It's really just setting the stage for the rest of the book. And I don't have anything more to say about these. Do you have anything from the introductions that you wanted to call out?
No, I didn't have any notes on this either. But my question to you, Mike, is where did this book come from? Like, why did you pick this book up? Like, what was the motivation when you picked it?
Yeah, well, I have this general rule where when someone that I respect recommends a book, I buy it immediately. And so this was one that when this version was actually published, I saw multiple people recommend it. Oh, you got to pick this one up. So it had been sitting on my bookshelf for a long time.
A long time, yeah.
I saw that it was, long time. I think it came out like a year ago. So not super long.
I thought it came out way before that. My fault. It came out in 23. Yeah, so my fault.
This version, probably shortly after Charlie died would be my guess. And so it had been sitting on my bookshelf, and I'd look at it every once in a while. I'm like, oh, I should really read that, but it's really big. I've got other books that I've got to read, or I'm more interested in reading. And then when we did Simple Marketing for Smart People last, I ran it by you ahead of time because I didn't want to give you a whole bunch of extra homework. But this is one that I've heard good things about, and maybe with the shorter one before this is good timing to do this particular book. You said sure, so we went for it. I didn't really know what to expect, and I didn't really know exactly what it was.
Yeah,
it's sort of like modern meditations, though I think I prefer Meditations by Charles Munger more than Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
I can tell you I 100% prefer Meditations by Munger than I did Meditations by Marcus.
But do you think that's a fair kind of description of it? That's sort of how it's written.
Yeah, I would say if you combined Meditations with the 101 essays, right? And like if you smush those two books together, that's this book, only it's written by, it's not even written. It's edited and like put together based on his talks, it's just strange. Like it's a strange concept for a book, but it works really well. And I think it came together well. So we should get into the chapters. So thanks for letting me know how we got to it.
Yeah. So the first chapter is a portrait of Charles T. Munger. And this is basically kind of just like a life history. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll just share some of the things that I have in my notes here, just some details. This part of the book, it's really not, the way that I took notes was I wanted to have a couple of historical facts. Like in my mind, I'm thinking of what does this look like when I transfer it to Obsidian. This is going to be like the important details if I wanted to go back and look up, who was Charles Munger. So born in Omaha, Nebraska, January 1st, 1924. Cool birthday, New Year's Day.
Yep.
He worked at Buffett and Son, an upscale grocery store owned by Warren's grandfather, Ernest. That was kind of interesting that they had a family connection, and then they kind of grew apart. His parents gave the kids several books at Christmas, which I thought was a really cool idea. They got reacquainted at a dinner party with Warren when he was 25 and Charlie was 31. That's where Warren convinced Charlie to quit practicing law. A lot of the talks come from his connection to Harvard Law School, so that's kind of a fascinating subplot there. And then they make a point to call out that despite his wealth, Charlie would prefer to remain anonymous. You kind of get that vibe as you go through the rest of the book. And he's a huge fan of Benjamin Franklin. There's a lot of additional details there, which are probably not interesting for Bookworm, but that kind of gives you a synopsis, I think, of who he was and how he got to be where he was with Berkshire Hathaway.
Something that I didn't realize as I was reading this, and I'm almost positive it was in this first chapter, was he did a lot of different things, right? Like, so he had his hand in a lot of different stuff throughout his life. I mean, I always knew of him as, he and Buffett were two peas in a pod, and they were taking Berkshire Hathaway, and they ran it, to crazy success. But like, I didn't know, he was in like real estate development, he was in law, he had then done the economics and the financial different side of things. Like he had his hand in a ton of different things, which I think when you look at his background and then you look at like the way, I guess when they get into the details of his investment strategies later on, it kind of makes sense why he's well-rounded, kind of disciplined in a bunch of different fields in a bunch of different ways, is because he had a lot of life experience. I mean, he had a whole lot of life experience living in the Midwest, then moving to California and all of that stuff. So that was really interesting. I like the fact that, from chapter 1, he talks about basically making friends with what they call the imminent dead, who had good ideas, and like having this, this education through smart people that came before you, and trying to have, I guess, this dialogue with them, even though they can't dialogue back because they're dead, which that ties into his connection to Franklin, and like, Franklin and then Samuel Johnson and a bunch of these people that he'll cite or he'll reference over and over and over again. Keynes, like it's like it was like he was friends with these people, even though there's no way he possibly could, which I think that's a cool aspect of his personality, or an aspect of the way he tried to engage with historical content.
Yeah. And so the reason that this is even titled Poor Charlie's Almanack is kind of a nod to his affinity for Benjamin Franklin with, what's his version? Poor Richard's Almanack?
Poor Richard's Almanack, yep.
Yeah, so I think if he had a historical figure that he wanted to be like, it's probably Benjamin Franklin, and that's kind of how the editor, I think, positions him as like a modern Benjamin Franklin. You think that's fair?
I would agree for sure.
Cool. All right, the next chapter is remembering the children on Charlie, and this is basically just some snippets and some memories from Charlie's kids. I don't think there's a whole lot here that is worth discussing, to be honest.
Yeah.
I will say the couple things I jotted down for my notes. One of the things that one of the kids had mentioned they were really impressed by is do the job right the first time. They mentioned that they always saw him reading books, which you can also pick up from some of the things that he says later on, but it's cool to hear that he actually walked the walk, basically didn't just talk about how you need to read books all the time. And then they spent a lot of time at the lake in Minnesota growing up. So again, Midwest roots. But it's interesting that I think all of the talks, or most of the talks, happened at places that were in California. Yep. So obviously that's where he was most of the time.
Yeah. I think that one of the major thing that came out of this chapter for me, and, in my prior research type work and a lot of the stuff that I did in academia before coming to this position, it was like entrepreneurship education. And we always take these entrepreneurs or these business people, and we put them on pedestals and talk about how amazing they are and all these wonderful things that they've done. And the one thing that came out of this one that made me sad, there are a lot of the gems from Minnesota. This is one of the kids talking. In those days when Charlie worked so long and so hard, that was the only meaningful time we spent with him. During the work weeks, he was off before dawn, home about dinner time, and then studied Standard & Poor's, and later would spend a couple hours on the phone with Warren. And it was like, this guy sacrificed. Like there was no like easy, like he didn't have this easy like, oh, I just fell into this really good investment strategy and became a partner with this other guy. It's like he really dedicated and committed the time to it. And I mean, they don't pitch it like this, but I have to think like on some level his family suffered because of it. Like the relationships among the family like were just not there from a time standpoint, right? Because he had his nose in a book, or he was working or whatever he was doing, which I think is just a really interesting kind of tidbit. But it's very, very common across really successful people that people will put on a pedestal is, there was this gigantic sacrifice in some aspect of their life, in some way, shape, or form of their life.
I kind of wonder if, just up front, I think you're probably right. Like that's not how I would want to be remembered, but I do wonder if that is maybe a little bit of a like a different era sort of a
generational thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he probably saw that as a sacrifice, and they probably just, because of his age and when this happened, I don't have a whole lot of memory from my grandpa on my dad's side, but I do remember a little bit, and I think he passed away when I was maybe like 10.
Okay.
And what I remember is that grandma was always the social one, and grandpa had his routines, and you did not mess with grandpa's routines. Yeah. He was the primary breadwinner, and he did his thing, and everyone else just kind of like supported him but stayed out of his way. And no one thought less of him for that. It was just like, well, that's what he does. And that's kind of the picture that I got with that description. Was not like, well, he needed to spend a couple of hours talking to his boss every night on the phone, but that was, his way of unwinding after a hard day of work, which sort of doesn't make sense, but sort of I get it. I don't know. I'm projecting at this point, but I feel like if you're as successful as he was, you probably get to, they're spending the summer at a lake in Minnesota when sounds like he's living in California. So I don't know, maybe like they're well off enough, obviously, that they can go spend the summer at the lake.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's wondering, where he's going to make the next buck. That's just, how he's wired maybe. And
that's how he's wired.
That's what he does for fun.
Yeah. I would agree. Like, I think that's how he was wired, right? Like I get the impression that like his brain was always churning on some sort of multidisciplinary thing, and how do I connect the dots, and how do I do this other thing. I just think that was an interesting, because isn't there a part 2 where they talk about walking into his office or something, and you basically just saw the top of his head, like, or like you saw a portion of his head behind the newspaper, because he was always like, he always had his nose in something, either a book or the newspaper.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm ready to go. Chapter 3.
All right. So chapter 3, the Munger approach to life, learning, and decision-making. So a couple things that stood out to me from this. Number 1, he's a big fan of mental models. And they mentioned that he had about 100 of them that he used to evaluate companies to invest in. He didn't make a ton of investments, and he tended to hold them for a long time. And he attempts to assess and understand competitive advantage in every aspect of the durability of that advantage. And there's these different, he's got a investing principles checklist, which I don't think there's a whole lot to be gleaned by this, but I'll just share: risk, independence, preparation, intellectual humility, analytic rigor, allocation, patience, decisiveness, change, and focus. And I say there's not a lot to be gleaned here because I'm not in a place where I'm asking myself for a checklist of investing principles.
Yep.
Maybe some of our listeners are. Go check out that section of the book.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
But not for me.
I really liked here how, you saw like kind of his whole structure, right? And you talked about the mental model. So Mike, this is why I thought you picked this book. I was like, oh, Mike loves mental models. So he wanted to know Munger's mental models, right? And I was like, so he picked this book, right? But I don't know. Was it just coincidence? I assume it's just coincidence.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't think his discussion of mental models is really all that effective. If you're looking for a better book on mental models, Shane Parrish just redid the whole mental models series. You can get the box set with the different colors. Those are the ones that I think are the best. And then after that, it's Super Thinking. I think we covered that one.
We covered that one. Yep.
And that's just a big list of all the different mental models. So if you're trying to discover mental models, that's more effective. But it is interesting to see which ones he thought were important.
Yep.
He's not going to go crank through the whole list of all the mental models, by the way. And I actually think that's a good thing.
And I think he would say the multidisciplinary approach is the important part, right? Like it isn't even necessarily the specific mental models. It's this multidisciplinary approach and then figuring out what is the fundamental model in that field or in the thing you are paying attention to. You get a little bit of inside his personality here. So it's kind of fun to sit there and outthink people who are way smarter than you, right? Like it's like, it was almost like life was a game, right? Like he was like trying to, go into the game and play the best game he could all the time. He talks about investing, and it basically is like, okay, well, we do the basic math on that. He goes, but then, it becomes philosophical as well, and there's psychology involved into it, but then it's also mathematical, and, like the feel comes, which I really like that aspect of it, is when you become such an expert or you've refined your process so much, like you can just feel what's going to work. You're like, oh yeah, like that's going to work, or nope, I got this weird feeling about it. It's just not going to go well. Like that's not going to work. And I like that he hits on that. I am a big fan of, and I want to do this more. I think if I was going to create a vague action item, right, like one that's really, really hard to measure and really, really hard to keep track of, is I want to practice this invert principle more, or this think about what to avoid more, because I think that's a really valuable concept. And it says Charlie generally focused on what to avoid first, what not to do before he considered what to actually do. And I think that's a really interesting way to approach the world that I don't approach the world that way, only when it's going to like kill me or hurt somebody, right? That's really when I go, oh, how do I not get hurt in this situation?
Yeah, I do like that. The inversion, invert, always invert. I forget the specific person who said that, but that is
Jacoby.
Okay,
Jacoby.
Yep, that's right. That one comes up over and over and over again.
Yep.
So the next chapter is really short. Chapter 4 is 11 talks. And this is really kind of the philosophy behind the talks. And then the rest of the book is the talks.
Yep.
So real briefly, a couple of things from this, just a couple pages chapter. Mentioned that Charlie is not shy when offering both frank criticism and constructive advice, whatever the topic, he can tell it like it is. And then these 11 talks are a special compilation for this particular book. And that's the meat of the book. So we should probably jump into those next. Anything else you want to mention before we do?
Yeah. So if you're going to read this book, if you haven't read it yet, every talk will have a preamble, and that's by Kaufman. Kaufman will explain to you what is going to happen. Then there's Charlie's talk, and I believe it's verbatim, right? It's just a transcript of his talk that he gave wherever he gave it. And then at the end, Charlie will revisit the talk and like say, oh, here's what I'd change, or here's what I won't change, or this stays true, or, I'd tweak this story a little bit, or whatever it might be. So that's the nature of the next, 11 sections, if you will, of the book. And some of them are real short. Like some of them are, you can read it in 15 minutes, and then other ones, like the last one is like 3 hours long. I mean, it's a really long chapter.
Which we'll get to that one. That's actually a combination of talks. So
yeah,
kind of weird. Yeah, let's start with the first one though. So talk number 1 is titled Harvard School Commencement Speech. And this was given June 13th, 1986 at Harvard School in Los Angeles. The format of this speech is interesting because he's kind of building off of and putting his own twist on Johnny Carson's commencement speech that he gave, where he shared 3 ways to guarantee misery. And that was ingest chemicals in an effort to alter mood or perception, envy, and resentment. So he starts by sharing those 3, and then he adds 4 more prescriptions for misery. Be unreliable, learn everything you possibly can from your own experience, minimizing what you learn vicariously from the good and bad experiences of others, living and dead. That's all the second one.
Yep.
Go down and stay down when you get your first, second, or third severe reverse in the battle of life. That's the third one. And the fourth one is ignore a story of a rustic who said, I wish I knew where I was going to die, then I'd never go there. And then he kind of extrapolates and shares a whole bunch associated with those points. So Johnny Carson's points are a lot more succinct and probably better as a list, but it's an entertaining speech, I think. And yeah, you could probably dig in further and, expound more on each one of those different prescriptions. But I don't know. There's not a whole lot I want to go into with these talks. I'd rather just kind of crank through them fairly quickly and then stop and park on some of the main ideas and the themes that emerge from them. But anything else that stands out to you from this first talk?
Nope, you highlighted exactly what I highlighted, so we can move on. You want me to intro number two, or do you want to?
Sure, go for it.
All? Okay, so number two. Number two was a lesson on elementary worldly wisdom as it relates to investment management and business. And the title is going to attach to where he gave it. He gave it at the USC Marshall School of Business. So this one, and this is where this book is really interesting to me, because like this one digs a lot more into investment management, digs a lot more into business, and some of them will be like that. This one was given on April 14th, 1994, to, like I said, the USC Marshall School of Business. And so coming out of this one, you get into everything like stock picking, but also you get into his like models of many disciplines and how you have to lattice work these models. But you get into stock picking. Let me see what else.
Well, I've got a specific question for you. So
Okay.
he actually shares, what should a young person look for in a career? I jotted down these three things. Don't sell anything you wouldn't buy yourself. Don't work for anyone you don't respect and admire. Work only with people you enjoy. Do you think that's good advice? And would you give that to the students that you work with?
Okay. I think that is great advice. I also think as a new graduate coming out of school, you have so little agency in so many of those things. And then you have so little knowledge about like that is stated from a position of someone who can walk into any room and immediately start talking to whoever they want to talk with, right? Because that's his background. Most people don't ever get that, right? So if you could figure that out, don't sell anything you want by yourself. Sure, like that makes complete sense, right? Don't work for anyone you don't respect and admire. Well, that takes a while to figure out. Now you can see it on the front end, right? Like you can be like, okay, I've seen enough of that person to know, like, nope, I don't want anywhere near them professionally, and then work with only people you enjoy. Again, you need to work with people before you know whether or not you enjoy them. This is a much easier thing to do at 80, right? Or a much easier thing to say at 70 or 80 than it is at 20 something when you're coming out of school going, okay, here we go. But you get to the ideas, like there's a whole question and answer section of this one, which is really, really, I think it was really interesting listening to his answers.
One of the things that I jotted down from this section, just because it was personal interest to me, was on page 99. He mentions owning a newspaper in Oshkosh. Do you know where Oshkosh is?
I know of Oshkosh. I don't know where Oshkosh is, but I know of it because my neighbor, right, has referenced Oshkosh before.
Okay.
That's the only reason I know it.
So Oshkosh is actually where I grew up. It's a small town in Wisconsin, probably 60,000 people. But the reason that he's probably familiar with it is because he reads a lot of history. Is it was a world famous city back in the day because it's located right on the Fox River, and the whole Fox Valley where we are was a big paper industry. So a lot of, like, when the Chicago fire happened, the lumber that they used to rebuild came from Oshkosh. And
Okay.
a lot of there's like some big old mansions in Oshkosh that were tied to Thomas Paine, who was the big lumber baron in the area. So it's kind of interesting to hear him mention Oshkosh.
All right, I'm gonna turn it back on you though. So one of the other questions that he was asked at the end of this talk, what overall life advice do you have for young people? And he puts out three things: have low expectations, have a sense of humor, and surround yourself with love of friends and family. What do you think about those?
Probably generally good.
Uh-huh.
The have low expectations. I don't think he's saying don't try to be successful. I think he's saying don't get bent out of shape when stuff doesn't go the way you think it will, which,
Yep.
younger me could probably afford to hear that.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah. And then the other thing from this section, which is probably worth calling out, is he talks about the multiple models. They have to come from multiple disciplines, the multidisciplinary approach. That's something that he hits on the rest of the talks. And you can't really know anything if you just remember random facts. You have to have these models in your head. There's one funny quote, which is on page 87. It's like, he says, if you don't get this elementary but mildly unnatural mathematics of elementary probability into your repertoire, then you go through a long life like a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest.
Yeah.
Which people have probably heard that quote associated with Charlie Munger before, would be my guess.
He's a really like interesting guy in terms of like, kind of a spitfire, if you will. Has some good one-liners, has some good quotes, but then like when he goes, deep into a topic, like he goes deep really, really quick. I feel like it's like, oh, and he's telling these stories, and next thing you know, like he drops into it and he goes real quick. He is, and we're going to see this throughout the talks, he's very hard on education and the educational system.
I want to talk to you about that, but probably not yet, because I think he hits it a little bit further in some of the later talks.
But what I want to get at here is his many models, or his models in many disciplines. We still get the question all the time. We say, well, hold on, with everything being on the internet right now, why would anybody go to university? Why would anybody care, right? Like, why would anybody still actually, pay that much money and blah, blah, blah. And this is, I think, he makes a really, really strong argument for why you would go to university. You get 4 years immersed. If it's a good university and they're doing the right thing, you get 4 years immersed in different mental models. And you get the space and you get the time and the challenge, if the faculty are doing a good job, to really think through those models and try to figure out what you believe and how you think around these different areas. So it's like his many models, or multiple models kind of idea, I think is a big proponent for the higher education system, or education in general, to push us along forward, or else you become a really, really good technician most of the time, I think. And this lets you be a little bit more well-rounded. So sorry, I had to because this was the first time we got into the models in any depth.
No, I agree with you. All right, so ready to go on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to 3.
Okay, so 3 is a lesson on elementary worldly wisdom as it relates to investment management and business revisited.
Yep.
This one was given April 19th, 1996 at Stanford Law School. Basically talking about how if you want to be a good thinker, you have to develop a mind that can jump the jurisdictional boundaries. You have to know how mental models interact, or you can't play the right hand. He warns you to be wary of heavy ideology, says each of us has to figure out his or her own lifestyle, which I think is probably pretty good advice. And then there's a quote here where I thought it was funny because it was part of the talk. He says, I don't have much interest in writing a book myself.
Yep.
As we're reading a book, which kind of he wrote, kind of not, I guess. But yeah, basically it's his book.
I don't think he wrote it, though. Like, I don't think this was his idea. I think the only part of this book that was his idea was the last talk. He was like, I really want people to know the big long one on human psychology. The other ones,
it's like, well, I guess if we're doing this.
Yep. Okay. From this talk for me, and if I say chapter, I apologize, but from this talk for me, he introduces this idea of what he calls the Lollapalooza effect, and he uses the idea just like he used multidisciplinary and many models and all that stuff throughout this whole thing. He talks about this Lollapalooza effect. And essentially the Lollapalooza effect is when you have multiple different forces, ideas, models, all pointing in the same direction. And because of that, it makes a larger effect on something. And I had never heard of it called this, or I'd never heard it called this before. Do you know of the concert Lollapalooza, like the weekend-long concert in Chicago?
I've heard of it, yeah. Like, I've never been, and I'd never heard of the Lollapalooza effect before, but interesting.
I've gone to Lollapalooza, right? Like when we lived in Chicago, like I went to, but I had I don't know if these two things are meant to connect with each other or if it's just a coincidence or what it is. But I thought, so he hits that key idea here. And then he also talks about the fact of when you're I guess you're trying to teach somebody or you're trying to convince somebody or make an argument to use examples, right? And that examples go a long way. So I thought those were a couple different things that stood out of this talk for me.
Yeah, and hopefully you're kind of getting the idea at this point that these are very well done talks, and there's a lot that you can glean from these. It's just, what are you actually picking up when you grab this 350-page tome at the beginning?
I've listened to a lot of people give a lot of talks, and all I can tell you is like almost all of these are better than most of the talks that people give, at different commencements and different things. 100%. It's just it's a really creative way, and he's quirky. Like I said, he's really quirky. So even if you don't love what he's saying, the way he says it makes you laugh. Yeah,
exactly. So talk 4 is practical thought about practical thought? Question mark.
Yep. This is my favorite. This is one of my favorite talks.
Interesting. Okay. So this was an informal talk given July 20th in 1996. And it's basically an exercise of how would you take $2 million in capital and build a business worth $2 trillion. And then he goes on to use Coca-Cola as an example and shares 5 different helpful notions at the beginning, but then lays out basically the 15-minute pitch that he would have given to this guy back in, I forget the year, 18 something.
Yeah, right? 18 something. I forget what it was too, but yeah.
On how he would plan to do this. And this was interesting. I don't know, like I didn't write down any notes from his big pitch. The things that stand out to me from that big pitch are, number 1, holy cow, he's really smart, at least when it comes to business. Yep. If he's just sitting down giving this talk, which I believe he could have done, then that is a whole nother level of business understanding, which I can understand, which I can kind of grok how you could get to that if he's constantly reading this stuff all the time. If he's just like living in this world and learning as much as he can about it, like that's how you become such a proficient business thinker. But it is impressive nonetheless when he lays it all out there. But the other thing is, I got enough of that when I was in business school.
Yeah, I didn't go to business school, so okay.
So for me, there's a little bit of this balance where the way that he does it is very, I'll say academic, like very traditional, and that's different than like the simple marketing for smart people style stuff. So it's not that I don't like the business thinking, but it did have that flavor to it, which I was a little bit like, not my jam. And I guess the reason that I have that sort of reaction to it is when I think about business school, I think about the things that I learned there, the things that were valuable. I don't know that a whole lot of it was textbook based. I think it was really just from the conversations with the people, which again, to your point, if you're immersed in that environment, that has value. I don't think you have to go to a business school in order to learn that. And exhibit A is Charlie Munger, who went to law school and didn't take a business class, didn't take an economics class. And here he is waxing poetic about those particular topics. You can totally learn that stuff other ways. And I don't know how valuable it is to think about things in that lens. Like it's sort of a fun exercise once in a while when you can nerd out about stuff certain ways. I guess my version of this is sort of like the practical PKM cohort, where I can nerd out about PKM workflows and Obsidian, but to the average person, it's kind of like, well, that has limited value. And that's really like the only place that I would really geek out about that kind of stuff. The rest of the time, it's just like, well, you know this stuff. Now, how do you actually apply it? You know? So I don't know. This is a little bit too meta for me, I guess.
Yeah. See, and I'm a sucker for a good case study, right? And essentially that's this whole chapter, right? Is the case study, turning 2 million into 2 trillion. Right? And I just thought that was, a lot of fun. Hold on, I'm blanking. I didn't. Yeah, okay. This is the case study. It's 1884 Atlanta, right? Okay. Yeah, Glotz and the Coca. Okay, I was making sure I wasn't on the wrong chapter. But then I like in this one too the 5 helpful notions. So he throws out there the 5 helpful notions. I won't go through them all now, but I thought those were a good like kind of summary of some of the things we get in a much more long-winded way other places. And then he's got a quote in here at the end from an advertisement.
I jotted this down too. I love this. He mentions this multiple places.
Yeah, I love this. It says, the old-time Warner and Swayze ad that was a favorite of mine. The company that needs a new machine tool and hasn't bought it is already paying for it. And I was like, man, that is a great, great quote. So, no, I just thought this one was a good, fairly short, kind of succinct version of his with a wrapped in a really good case study.
Yep, agreed. All right, so talk 5 is the need for more multidisciplinary skills from professionals, educational implications. I think I got that title right.
You did, yes.
Okay, so this was given, it's a little bit clumsy, but given April 24th, 1998 at the 50th reunion of Harvard Law School, so to the class of 1948. So this is where he introduces the idea of Socratic solitaire, which is kind of interesting. Do broad-scale professionals need more multidisciplinary skill? Was our education sufficiently multidisciplinary? In elite broad-scale soft science, what is the essential nature of practical, best form multidisciplinary education? In the last 50 years, how far has elite academia progressed toward attainable best form multidisciplinarity? What educational practices would make progress faster? And just in that, you can kind of get a tone for the grammar. And if that's off-putting to you, you're not going to like this book.
Yep, I agree.
He uses a lot of big words because he reads a lot of books. Yep. There's a couple things that stood out to me from this section. One is this is where you find out that he never took a business or an economics class, which is sort of astounding because he's so smart when it comes to this stuff. Another thing is that there's this 2-part rule that he talks about, and this is actually on the back cover of the printed version. This is pretty simple, but pretty brilliant if used in the right context. Take a simple basic idea. That's part 1. Part 2 is take it very seriously.
Yep.
You can see how that could translate into success. But the thing that I really wanted to just ask you, because this whole thing is really where he's starting to rail on the way that things are taught in academia. What do you think about his statement that many more courses should be mandatory, not optional?
Okay, so you have to understand my background coming from this is I live in a world where we don't get many optional courses, right? Like, so engineering, I mean, my students have 0 electives. You know, like there's maybe like one class where they can pick the version of the class that they want, but like they don't have any electives. And when I was in undergrad, I barely got any electives at all. And even then they were very, very tightly confined, like what I was allowed to take as an elective. So I don't have any kind of rub on, you know, what they should do. I think one of the drivers of this and why he says is they should be, you know, more required courses is because the courses he's talking about, people don't want to take, like they won't want to take. So he's talking about this, you know, multidisciplinarity that's going to round people out in a way that's going to make them uncomfortable, and it's going to introduce them to models that don't make sense for them. So for instance, a communications major getting a basics physics class, I can tell you right now, communication majors want nothing to do with physics, right? They want, like, they don't want to do the math. They don't want to do the science. Like, they want nothing to do with that. And there's nothing, I'm not going to tell you that there's anything wrong with that. That's just the reality of the way it is. Just like my engineering students, when you give them an English literature class, you know, or a rhetoric class, they're like, this is the dumbest class I've ever taken. And it's like some of them will see the bigger picture either during that class or later on down the road. They'll be like, oh yeah, like that was a really powerful class for me. So like one of the ones I took was logic, right? When I took like a basic logic class, you know, philosophy, you know, kind of logic class. And, man, what a crazy powerful course, because it taught you the way people think and the way people put things together and then how people can mess that up. And so I'm a fan of this, right? Like, I think that our job as academia is to make decisions to help educate people in a certain way. I think it's the student's job to figure out, do I like that form of education? And is that something I'm going to buy into? Now, where the engineering ed world and me, right, where my colleagues in the engineering ed world would like get cranky, you know, and start to debate me on it is like, well, what about agency? You know, like, what about the student's agency in the whole learning process? And I would say, like, okay, they have agency. They have agency in the degree that they pick. So therefore, they're going to focus and specialize in certain ways. And then we're going to be encouraging them to push them out of their comfort zone or push them away from it. Where this all falls down, though, is it done effectively? Because if it's not done effectively, you just throw it all out the window, right? Because you're making them take courses that actually don't matter, and that's when everybody gets real cranky.
Yeah, so that's kind of the frame of reference I had. I went to a small liberal arts college in Green Bay called deep here, called St. Norbert, and they make you take a whole bunch of different classes, a bunch of different areas, and there were some of those classes that I was just like, I really resent the fact that I am paying $30,000 a year, and I'm sure it's much more now, to take this stupid class.
I hear that all the time. Yeah. It's like, I can't stand this class. Why do I have to take it? So
yeah,
I teach some of those classes.
And I feel like there should be, I think I can get on board with him about more classes being mandatory instead of optional, but I'm kind of curious what he means by that, because I don't think he's talking about liberal arts education at this point. I think he's talking about a bunch of tangentially related classes, which are sort of like, well, you could take this one or this one. I think he would probably be arguing that, no, you should take both of them. Not if you are a business economics major, you should be taking religion classes, which is what I did.
Well, I think he's coming at it from a person who has had to learn a lot of this stuff on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying, what if we took these core ideas and we made them do that and I say made them, right? Like we required them to do that in, basic undergraduate education.
Yeah. So I don't know. And there's probably like a big debate to be had about the right way to do this. I think there's probably an element of truth in what he's arguing for, but also I wasn't a big fan of the liberal arts approach. I kind of wish I had not gone to a school that took that approach, just because, I went there, my wife went there. We met a bunch of great people there. We had a lot of great experiences there. Also put us in a whole bunch of debt that took us a really long time to pay off. Yeah. And I used almost none of it. Same with her.
I mean, my thing is the intangibles of that. Like, how do you measure some of the intangibles of that? Like, is there more of that thinking that you actually apply? But what I'll tell you is I had the opposite experience, because I went to Penn State. And I mean, it was engineering through and through. Like, we are teaching you to be an engineer through and through. So it was 100% not a liberal arts education, right? Like, there were times when I was like, man, I just wish I could take like a basic XYZ class, right? Like, to learn personal accounting or whatever, like whatever it was. And it was like, nope, you got to, these types of classes. And they tried, but there's just not a lot of room. Okay, we should move on. Though, because I could nerd out on this all day.
Well, I mean, the next talk, I don't have a whole lot to say about. This is Talk 6, Investment Practices of Leading Charitable Foundations, given October 14th, 1998, as a speech to the Foundation Financial Officers Group at the Miramar Sheraton Hotel in Santa Monica, California. I basically just jotted down that extra care in thinking also introduces extra errors. So you got to be aware of that. And then 2 quotes. What a man wishes he will believe, by Demosthenes, and You Must Not Fool Yourself, and You're the Easiest Person to Fool, by Richard Feynman. That's all I got.
The Feynman quote was all I had. And Mike, I'll even go further, and I would say Talk 6, Talk 7, and Talk 8. I'm good, right? Like we can tell what the titles are and just keep on flying, because those talks they were interesting to read, but I didn't get anything out of them.
Okay, well, let's go to the next one then, which is Talk 7, Breakfast Meeting of the Philanthropy Roundtable. There is an idea here and an original term that he comes up with, which we should probably talk a little bit about. So this was given November 10th, 2000 in Pasadena, California. And he takes the idea of bezel, which is a contraction of the word embezzle, coined by John Kenneth Galbraith, to describe the amount of undisclosed embezzlement. And he sort of creates this argument that embezzlement that you're not aware of isn't really stealing from a specific person. So maybe it's not that big a deal. That's a totally gross representation of the well-articulated argument that he's making. But basically, he's kind of talking about how when you print new money and you introduce it into the economy, you're not taking it from somebody else. So maybe that's not as bad as you think it is. So he creates this term fee bezel, which is the functional equivalent. For bezel. Fee bezelment is the process of creating fee bezel, and fee bezelers are the persons engaged in fee bezelment. There's a whole big economic discussion to be had on the relevance of this, which is kind of interesting to me because I was a business major and an economics minor. So a lot of the things that he's talking about, I remember from some of those economics classes. I can tell you I used zero of it in what I actually do, running my own business and even working with other small businesses. There's, I don't know, micro versus macroeconomics, not a whole bunch of relevant application day-to-day for that sort of stuff. But it is important if you're trying to understand how markets work and stuff like that. So he's at a whole nother level where maybe that stuff is super important. But, I can still draw the curves and the charts that he's talking about. Like I recognize what those look like, but I have not had a single time in my working existence since I graduated where I have actually had cause to draw those and talk about those up until this point.
Yeah. I misspoke because I guess I did get one interesting thing out of these 3 chapters. Samuel Johnson, I think I would like to read more Samuel Johnson. So in Talk 7, there's an ethical rule from Samuel Johnson. Basically, he believed that the maintenance of an easily removable ignorance by a responsible office holder was treacherous malfeasance in meeting moral obligation. And I was like, that's actually a really interesting idea, right? Like if you like intentionally don't get rid of the bad thing, you are to blame. Like you are the cause of the blame. And I'm like, I think I would like this Samuel Johnson guy. I think he and I would resonate if I could understand his structure, his sentence structure and word choice. I think I'd like him.
That's cool. Ready to go to the next one?
Yes. We're going to talk 8, I think.
Yeah. Talk 8 is the great financial scandal of 2003. What's interesting about this is that this was a handwritten talk that Charlie wrote when he was vacationing in the summer of 2000. And it's sort of a prediction of what was going to happen in terms of financial markets crashing. And it's sort of a parable about a historical company, but under a fictional name. Mm-hmm. And the specifics of everything, again, reminded me of my economic textbooks. Not necessarily a great thing, but for some people, maybe, that is really of interest to you. There are a couple of things that I got from this. One, there's a quote from this fictional account. It's sort of like a parable, kind of Patrick Lencioni style, is the best way to put it, I think, where he says, it's hard for an empty sack to stand upright.
To stand upright. Yep.
Sort of interesting. And then he's talking about how this fictional/not fictional company, after the founder died and people came to take it over, they wanted to maintain this level of growth. So they were kind of exploiting this economic loophole in U.S. law. And eventually that just led to a whole big collapse. But there's this quote. It says, if we mix only a moderate minority share of turds with the raisins each year, probably no one will recognize what will ultimately become a very large collection of turds.
Yes.
That's pretty funny.
I'm telling you, he's just so like quirky in the way he writes and like the examples that he uses. But then like the whole point of this whole thing is like employee stock options. And he's going into like actual, I mean, you probably, I would assume you understood this way better than I did, because I was like, okay, I get the somewhat gist of what's happening here. I was like, but I don't really know anything about employee stock options and all this stuff and like what they're actually doing and how they're, I guess how they're hurting themselves to where in a couple of years they're going to be, they're going to be hurting long-term financially. So I kind of glazed over, right? Like, so I'm reading this chapter going, blah, 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 because I kind of glazed over because I was like, I don't really understand the economic side of what we're talking about here. And he's going hard into the economic side of what we were doing.
Well, see, that's the thing there. In my opinion, there is very a very limited application of this stuff. So I went to, and I got a business degree. The traditional path that you can follow from that is to climb the business ladder. So I had a bunch of friends that I graduated with who went into commercial real estate down in the Milwaukee area, and they played the game and they climbed the ladder. And I have one friend now who is president of one of the companies down there that, leases out all of the big skyscrapers. Those are his accounts. Mm-hmm. I had zero interest in that ever.
Yeah.
So if you are trying to get to that level, there is a ladder that you climb. I think there has never been a better opportunity for people who wanted to own their own small business and are completely not interested in that particular world. You don't need the MBA. You don't need to jump through the hoops. So if you were to take the average business student at this point, which path are they taking? It's probably a lot more 50-50 than it was even back then. But I've always kind of taken the untraditional path. I guess you can blame my dad for that. He did the the same sort of thing. Plays on his terms. So yeah, like that's not, I remember that sort of discussion from my economics classes, and I could study enough to talk about that stuff intelligently, but have had zero real world application of that since then. And there probably is a place where you can do that. And for the person who is looking for resources in that particular area, they're probably already familiar with Poor Charlie's Almanack. And for the people who aren't, there are sections of this book, just know that like you're not going to need to really engage with this. It's fine that it's over your head.
Exactly. Can I introduce chapter 9? Because I have a point that I want to make with chapter 9.
Yes, but one other thing from chapter 8, the other note I have here, it's very clear he is not a fan of accountants.
Oh, not at all. Oh yeah, not at all. There's somebody else he's really not a fan of. He rips them. Oh, chiropractors. Why does he rip chiropractors so bad? Because he rips them like a bunch of times.
Well, I think if I have extended family members that I think, just from family conversations at Christmas growing up, stuff like that, where we get together with the whole extended family, I maybe have a little bit of insight into this where chiropractors, I could be completely wrong. And I actually wanted to be a chiropractor at one point. I was trying to get into Palmer Chiropractic College in Iowa, I think. But okay. Biology, chemistry, not for me.
Okay.
So I switched to business. But that was what I went into originally, and just was not my thing. But I remember people saying things about like quack doctors and things like that. So my only guess is that maybe that's a newer medicine, and people who are just really traditional view it as not valid. But I would think at this point, most people know, chiropractic care is a real thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And the other thing I would think is, he talks about this later on when he talks about like the different tendencies in psychology, but about the fact that like I think a lot of times a chiropractor is like, okay, I'm gonna fix you, and then you're gonna come back later, and I'm gonna fix you again, and like this is a continual thing, and that just seems something like Munger's like, no, we don't buy into that thing where your fix leads to more of you getting fixing me. Right? That's just not his style.
That's probably part of it too. Yeah.
Okay, can I do talk 9? I want to call it chapter 9, but can I do talk 9?
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so talk 9, academic economics, strengths and faults after considering interdisciplinary needs. So this talk was 2003. It's one of the longer talks that he gives. He gives it to the Herb K. undergraduate. It's the Herb K. undergraduate lecture at the University of California, Santa Barbara in the economics department. And the reason why I wanted to introduce this was because it's almost like people want him to talk about economics. and all he wants to do is talk about interdisciplinarity and education and psychology. And people keep saying, please talk about economics. And he's like, no, I want to talk about these other things. And they're like, but I really want you to tell me how to make $1 million and $1 billion. I mean, he's like, no, I want to talk about psychology and education and it's like, I felt that tension the entire book, right? Because it's like you'll get these chapters and he'll like go on this tirade about some, employee stock options or some economic principle. And then there's these other ones where it's like, okay, I got to write this one. Like this one was mine. Like nobody told me what to do. And it's all about like education and thinking and mental models. And then, oh, by the way, he'll say economics enough. That way people were like, yeah, this is why you invited us.
He basically was like, this is the problem with your economics department. Is kind of interesting that he was invited to give the talk there.
Yes. Like it's crazy. So he's really a guy who's speaking with nothing to lose. Right, yep. Absolutely nothing to lose. You know what I mean? But somebody at some point, I think it's in the intro by Kaufman. He says this is the grand unified theory of the Munger approach. Right, like so if you're looking for his ideas around this interdisciplinarity concept, it's really here. Here he talks about the fact that, appeal to interest, and he gets into the fact that opportunity cost is a superpower, incentives are a superpower. He's talked multiple times up to this point about the tragedy of the commons, which, Mike, are you familiar with the tragedy of the commons?
Yes, I don't remember the specific details of it, but it's basically a model. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a good example of fish in a pond that we'll run to teach students how to use like Excel and how to think about tragedy of commons, which basically you can fish out of this pond but everybody gets to fish out of the same pond. So as a group, we have to control the resources in that pond because if we use up all the fish, everybody dies. But at the same time, there's personal stake in it because I want to get more fish than you do. And it's this really fun game that we play because students will start competing with each other. And then you'll get student teams that'll group up and they'll form like little sub clans, and then they'll hoard the fish for themselves. And then they'll try to like offer the fish to the other teams to buy and stuff. So it's like the tragedy of commons is really interesting if you've never explored that or not, but he's talked about it a bunch of times up until this point. He goes through, a lot of different things, right? Like, there's I'm looking at how many there are 9. So there's 9 different points he has on what's wrong with academic economics, right? Like he basically just goes on this tirade of all the things that are wrong with academic economics. Some of them are more interesting than others. And then, so let's hit a couple of the ones that we think are interesting. So the first one I think was interesting is too little is paid attention to these second and higher order effects, that essentially we only look at what the immediate impact is going to be of something. We don't look at the second and third order effects. I thought that was an interesting one to take away from here. Another one is that fairness and unfairness, and I really like what he says here is, and I'm going to read it because he says it so much better than I can. Morality should sometimes appear unfair, like most worldly outcomes. The craving for perfect fairness causes a lot of terrible problems in system function. Some systems should be made deliberately unfair to the individuals because they'll be fairer on average to all of us. And it goes on further. But like, what a different concept than we have right now. It's like, oh no, it should be fair across everything. And it should be completely egalitarian and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, hold on, maybe not, right? Maybe when we do that, we actually break the larger system. And he's got, a few of these, and everybody who reads it will get different stuff out of it. But those are a couple of the ones I took out. Mike, what'd you take?
Is that related to the last one, the not enough attention to virtue and vice effects?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's the last one.
So there's a quote associated with that, which I think is interesting. The cash register did more for human morality than the congregational church.
Yeah.
Basically just eliminating the ability to steal money.
Yep.
Is what caused people to act right, not educating them on the right way to act. One of the 9 objections he has, which I thought was kind of funny, not enough attention to the concept of embezzlement, which he made up.
Yeah.
So,
oh man.
Let me see. Oh, the first one too, fatal unconnectedness leading to man with a hammer syndrome. He talks about man with a hammer syndrome throughout, and that is basically, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and makes sense that would be something that he would key in on, since he's since he is advocating for having all these mental models and being able to use them. So I can totally see, having been in economics classes, how like the micro and macroeconomics specifically, you kind of get funneled into this way of thinking about things, and this is the way that markets behave. And so obviously this is the cause, and maybe it's not that simple. So I think that's probably a pretty fair one. Yeah, I mean, every single one of these objections, he's probably accurate in sharing it. Kind of weird that he's doing this to an economics undergraduate class, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Also, he like basically calls out the way that they teach economics at the beginning when he shares a story about how he asked someone at the Julius Stein Eye Institute in UCLA, why are you treating cataracts only with this totally obsolete cataract operation? And the response was, but Charlie, it's such a wonderful operation to teach.
Yeah.
He's like, so what? It's useless.
Yep. Unfortunately, that's all too real.
Yep. All right. Ready for the next one?
I am ready for the next one.
Okay. So the next one, Talk 10, USC Gould School of Law Commencement Address. This was given May 13th, 1997 is the date that I wrote down. Is that correct?
No, it's 2007.
2007. Okay. Actually, it was 2997. I'm like, that can't be right.
2997.
Yep.
He gave it
Okay,
in the
so
future.
May 13th, 2007. The safest way to try and get what you want is to try and deserve what you want. I like that quote.
Mm-hmm.
Mentions how the acquisition of wisdom is a moral duty. I like that. He hits on this thought about you need to be a lifelong learner. Without that, you're not going to get very far. There's a quote associated with that. It says you're not going to get very far in life based on what you already know.
Yep.
That's a really interesting thing to say at a commencement address for a law school. I kind of wonder how that went over, but I completely agree with it. Yeah, there's a bunch of just like random tidbits from this that I jotted down. One thing was he mentions that about half of Warren Buffett's waking time is spent reading. That's a lot of time to be reading. I don't think I could do that. I thought I read a lot, but I guess I got further to go.
Okay, I want to hear your comment on this, so I want to prep you, or I want to beat you to it.
Okay.
Do you remember the Wooden comment? The non-egality, John Wooden?
No, what was that?
Okay. So there's a section in here where he talks about maximizing non-egality, and basically he refers to John Wooden, and John Wooden would say, like, listen, the best players are going to play, and if you want playing time, you have to be one of the best players, right? Because that's the way it works. And like you get into this idea like meritocracy and stuff like that, but like I really like just that he's not afraid to just throw that out there and say like, listen, we can lower the quality of the overall product, or we can say come up, like rise up to the level of the people who are really out there and really performing. And I thought that was a really interesting one from this commencement speech.
Yeah. So I do like that a lot. And I like that concept, and I have lots of thoughts on that. I guess I just kind of glossed over that. That didn't really jump out to me when I was reading this particular book, but I agree with that. I mean, John Wooden is one of the most successful coaches ever. You really can't knock what he was able to achieve in terms of his success as a coach. And I would argue in his leadership and development of people as well. So I think there's that is a completely accurate and fair and right way to approach things. I think there's a caveat with that though, where if you are going to say only the best people are going to play, that's fine. If you are a good coach, you will then make clear what are the criteria for becoming the best. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen very much. Like I've got kids who are going through that stuff currently with coaches on the teams that they're on. They're frustrated with their lack of playing time. And I would agree. They're better than some of the kids that are playing. And you can say, well, life's not fair. You just got to learn to deal with it. Part of it is, you got to speak up and have conversations with your coach. One particular instance that has happened, and the coach just is a terrible communicator, so they don't even know what to tell them. And at that point, like, you got to figure it out for yourself. But the ideal scenario would be the coach who is responsible for putting the best team on the field or on the court, whatever, has made it clear to everybody on the team, this is what I am looking for. This is the definition of success. Do these things better than anybody else, and you will play.
Yeah. Did you wrestle? Did you ever wrestle in your life for like a? So this is there's two ideas here. So I'll get to the wrestling one in a second. But like this also works really well with competitive leagues as opposed to like developmental leagues. Like I think if you're in a developmental league, this kind of goes out the window because it's like, no, you're trying to develop your players as you go. So maybe you don't just play the best or whatever. But wrestling was really, really interesting for that because you would have essentially wrestle offs. And you could do those as many times as you needed to do them. So it's like if you were in a weight class and there were 3 other people in your weight class on the team, at any given time, somebody could be like, hey, I want to do a wrestle off for, whatever it is. Or the coach would say like every so many weeks, we're going to give you the chance to do wrestle offs. And you had to do it. Like you had to prove that you were still the best wrestler to start at that weight class. And what an interesting good way to establish your starting lineup is based on the wrestle offs.
Yeah. So I didn't have that, but I did play tennis and I played college tennis. So I was pretty good, but not great. And with tennis, you'd have challenge matches.
Yep.
So yeah, if you lose, then someone takes your spot.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And there was the ladder, so you could challenge the person above you and you work your way up and it just kind of sorts itself out by the end. If you want to be number 1, you got to beat number 1.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a little bit different with team sports, unfortunately.
And personalities, right? And human psychology.
Yeah. I mean, you never want to default to excuses in politics, but the truth is that it's real, and you got to figure out how to navigate that stuff. That's something that my kids are working through right now. I do think that my approach to that would be a squeaky wheel, right? Keep asking the coach, become annoying to the coach. Like, hey, I want to know what I can do to get better. And then when you do that over and over and over again, you build up a body of work, becomes so good they can't ignore you. Be like, hey, I deserve to be out there.
Exactly.
No one wants to have to do that.
And it's the presentation of it, right? Like it's what can I do to get better? What can I do to get better? Not I should be starting, right? Because those are 2 very different messages you send to the coach, right? It's like,
yeah, but if they can't tell you, and you are one of the better players, I think you could get to the point where you do have to tell the coach, okay, so I think I should be starting.
Yeah, exactly.
Why am I not starting? Just tell me.
Yep.
That's completely fair. You don't have to do it in front of the rest of the team. You can
I agree.
do it one-on-one, but people, am I right?
People. Yep. Well, and we're going to get into people in talk 11.
Yeah. So actually I do need to call out in talk number 10. This is where my one action item comes from.
Okay.
So it's not really related to the topic of the talk necessarily, but he is a big fan of checklists. And at this point, I'm reading this and he's talking about how we need to have more checklists. Good doctors have checklists. We should have these checklists. And I was like, I should build more checklists. So that is my action item, more checklists.
My issue with his checklist is I'm not exactly sure what's on his checklist and like
That's
how
fair.
that works
Yep.
out, because it's like it wasn't very clear. I know he's got a lot of checklists and I know he works down through the checklists, but I'm not really sure how they're constructed. So
I'm just building more checklists. I'm not building more Munger style checklists.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
All right. So the last one is talk 11, and this is the big kahuna. I don't know. This is a whole bunch of psychology-based tendencies that often mislead. He's got a list. I think there's like 26 of them. I don't even know how many pages. This is the one that you sent me a message about that was like, hey, just so you know, this is a big one. It's a combination of 3 different talks that were selections from 3 of his talks that were combined into one that he never made. And those 3 talks were the Bray Lecture at the Caltech Faculty Club in February 2nd, 1992, a talk under the sponsorship of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies at the Harvard Faculty Club on October 6th, 1994, and the talk under the sponsorship of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies at the Boston Harbor Hotel, April 24th, 1995. So he combined these into one big long talk, revised in 2005. And I don't even know how to talk about this one.
I don't either. I honestly don't either. I mean, this one's a really hard one, y'all. I mean, it's 25 tendencies, and it's just his thoughts on these 25 psychological tendencies.
Yeah, it's ginormous. There's a couple things, I guess, just random tidbits I'll pull out here, but really have nothing to do with the message I was trying to get across with this big long talk. I do think the tendencies are interesting if you wanted to jump into them, but it's not even worth going through the list. They're basically psychology-based tendencies that can often mislead. And he does say at one point in this talk that they can mislead, but they're not necessarily bad. They're tendencies for a reason. So tendencies are generally positive, but he does mention that it's easier to prevent a habit than to change it. And he mentions that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I had heard that before, and I like that phrase. He talks about the Tolstoy effect, which is when man makes excuses for fixable poor performance instead of providing the fix, which is kind of interesting. He mentions that we should learn how to ignore the examples of others when they're wrong. Sounds great. How do you necessarily know when they're wrong? Introduces Granny's rule, which is eat the vegetables first. Generally good advice. And he mentions Influence by Robert Cialdini as a great book to read. That one has come up as a recommendation for Bookworm a lot. And there's a new and revised version, which I think is like 400 pages. I don't want to read it for the podcast because it's so
looked
long.
at it.
Yeah.
We looked at it before and it was way too long. We were just like, nah, it's too long.
It would be an interesting conversation. And it's also kind of interesting that he's sort of railing against psychology, but then also exalting, Influenced by Robert Cialdini. And I think really he's talking about really the way that psychology is taught. He does mention, by the way, that psychology can be used for good or evil, and how you can use it to manipulate people, and how cult leaders will do this sort of thing. So I think that's an important caveat for not just relevant to this discussion, but with a lot of the books that we read for Bookworm. That came up a lot with like the 48 Laws of Power. And it really made me uncomfortable reading that because it's a very direct connection. Robert Greene isn't necessarily saying like use it this way, but this is how people can use it, sort of a thing. Yeah. I don't know. So that's important to recognize with all of this stuff. But yeah, this is a big talk and it's exhausting to read.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as Mike's put it, we could go through the different 25 things and what we got out of it. But like, I think you're going to go through it when you read it and you're going to pull different pieces out of it. What I think is interesting is if you've never thought about these tendencies before, or if there are a handful of them that you've never thought about before, they're compelling to read and they're compelling to think about, right? So not having taken a bunch of psychology classes, these were enjoyable is probably the wrong word, but they were informative, right? Like they were informative to read and informative to work through. What I'll say is, I almost wanted to take this one and separate it out and like do it on its own because, I felt like at one point I was just trying to get through it, I wasn't like taking it in anymore. So,
well, see, this is where he's not in his element talking about this type of stuff. Cause basically these psychology-based tendencies that often mislead, it's a different framing, but it's sort of like the 48 Laws of Power. And he's not the guy to talk about that. That's Robert Greene.
But I truly think this is why he wanted this book to be published, is for this last section.
Could be. I mean, this one is definitely one that he wanted to get off of his chest. This is also the one that he has the biggest like revisited thing at the end. And the most interesting thing out of this particular talk for me is the way that he ends that and ends the book. It's like, and with that, I have nothing more to say.
Exactly. What a great way. What a great way to end the book.
It's like, mic drop, I'm out.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Anything else from the book before we get into action items?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good to get into the 0 action items that I have on this book.
Okay. So I have the one action item which I mentioned from the last talk, and that is simply to create more checklists. And I guess I'll report back on this being successful if I've created at least one more checklist.
Yes.
Which I think is going to happen because I have a call this week with someone that I'm working with as a kind of executive assistant role. So I'm going to have to make checklists for them.
Nice.
That's going to be the forcing function. But yeah, that's all I got.
I have an action item that isn't related to the book. It's related to
from the beginning,
from the pre-show and all that stuff. So I have an action item, but it has nothing to do with the book. It's more about, a co-working sessions for, different things. So yeah, I just don't have any real action item takeaways from this. I will tell you that that's not an indication of like lack of interesting content. It's just more of there wasn't really anything tangible to act on coming out of this one.
Yep. It's fair. All right. Style and rating.
Give it to us, Mike. Come on.
You hear the dread in my voice. No, just kidding. This is a difficult one to rate. Like I said, I think I've not done a great job picking books for Bookworm lately. I do really like this book, and I am really glad that I read it. Am I going to pick this up and go through it again? I'm not sure. I think I probably would like to go through it again at a slower pace. The audiobook is also included with the online version, so I could definitely see going back and listening to this again as an audiobook. But cranking through this in 2 weeks is not the right way to approach this book.
I agree.
It's one of those that you kind of dip in and out of periodically, and you do so with an open fascination about what made this guy tick. And if you are interested at all in the life of Charlie Munger, which I am, then this is a good one. I kind of made a joke earlier about this is sort of like a modern meditations by Charlie Munger. I think that is kind of accurate. Like if Marcus was just writing all this stuff down and it was written, it combined into these different books. So substitute books with talks and add some historical stuff at the beginning. And if you do the online version, a bunch of cool old photographs to really give you a picture for the life of one of the most successful business people who has ever lived. I get that the whole topic of business is not going to be interesting to the entire Bookworm audience. If that's you and you've listened this far, thank you. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some people who just have no interest whatsoever in the topic of economics and all that kind of stuff, you kind of can self-identify whether that's you. I would say probably you don't need to pick this one up. But on the other hand, there's the free one online. You can poke around in that a little bit and at least see if it piques your curiosity and decide if you want to read it that way. So it's sort of hard to recommend this one because number one, it's like, who is this for? Number two, which version do you recommend? I generally recommend people go buy the physical book and read that. And I'm glad I own that version of it. But I think this is the one book in the history of Bookworm I would say, don't buy that first.
I'm vigorously shaking my head, everyone. I agree with you completely. Yes.
Yeah. So there's absolutely no risk in loading up the website and poking around on that and seeing if this is of interest to you. I have trouble reading through like the totality of the material in that format. There's just something about reading on a digital screen. It's not the same. So I'm still not a fan of that format. And honestly, if I had to read the book that way, I wouldn't have finished it. Wouldn't have happened. But I'm also probably not the ideal customer for this, which is kind of weird. I feel like a lot of the things that made him tick are not the things that make me tick.
Yeah, yep.
It was a little bit surprising to discover that, but this is, the people who are absolutely going to love this are the business bros. That's the best way to describe it.
Okay. Okay.
Does that mean that people who have an affinity for like how business processes and systems are put together won't get anything out of it? No. But also, if that's you and you've got enough time to invest reading a 350-page book, I could probably give you a bunch of other ones that you're going to get a higher return on your time, attention, and energy investment. So I'm not sure that this is, one that I'd necessarily recommend it, like I said at the beginning, to solve a problem that you are currently facing. It's one of those ones that you just kind of got to dip your toes in every once in a while because it's fun. And that's going to sound weird to some people. Like reading a business book by Charlie Munger, that's fun. For some people, yeah. So I do think it's really well written. I think Charlie Munger is brilliant. And I know these talks are edited. I did not go back and find like a video or an audio of him giving these talks, but I have no doubt that he's not stumbling over his words, and kind of to the point that you made earlier, he's a much better speaker than most speakers that you would hear. I feel like just the quality of the thinking that is evidenced in the talks that he shares is very aspirational for me. I feel like I've learned a lot through the years doing Bookworm. I've learned to think on my feet. I feel like I do a pretty good job of fairly concisely communicating. And some people will laugh at that because we're approaching 2 hours as we're talking about this.
Yeah.
But I think that has been a big takeaway from Bookworm for me is I've gotten a lot better. I still have a long ways to go, but I don't throw out nearly as many just jumbled word salads as I used to. But if you want an example of what perfection looks like, I mean, this is it. I'm going to rate it 4 stars. And I guess that there's a caveat there. Just for some people, they're absolutely going to love this. And this is a 5-star, and even more if it was possible. There are some people who, this is just totally not the right thing for them. I feel like I'm kind of in between. And so for me personally, it's a 4-star book.
Okay. Well, I could not disagree with you more about the online version of this book. I loved every second of that. And if I could have every book written in this format, I would read every book in this format. I 100% loved the Stripe Press version of this book. It gave some visuals that I thought may added value to it. It had the audio right in there, like in line, so you could listen to it if you got tired or bored or whatever it was, and you wanted just to change it up a little bit, which I'm a big fan of. Mike, I love you, but I could not disagree with you more on that.
That's fair.
Okay. In terms of the nature of this book, the big caveat to this book is, do you care about Charlie Munger's opinion? Because if you care about Charlie Munger's opinion, read the book. If you don't care about Charlie Munger's opinion, or if you are definitely negative towards Charlie Munger's opinion, you may not want to read this book. I mean, that like you're getting one individual's opinion on a bunch of different things. I think the thing that I maybe would disagree with you a little bit on, but I don't remember how exactly you phrased it. But it's like, I actually don't think this is that much of a business book or that much of an economics book. I actually think it's much more of a human psychology applied in economics, human psychology applied investing, or a mental models applied. I think this is a different education style book, right? Like I don't know exactly what word to put on it right now, but because of that, I actually liked it better. Like the parts of this book that I didn't get as much out of and wasn't as interested in were capital investing and not capital investing, but the investing stuff and the economics talks and stuff like that. Like I just wasn't as interested in that. But when he talked about, the multidisciplinarity, the lattice work, the different psychology topics and how they applied in context, and that we should be lifelong learners, like I was in for that. Like that was interesting to me. The other part is I didn't know a ton about Charlie Munger. So it was it was interesting to me from a biography type standpoint. So if that sounds interesting to you and you're willing to dip your toe in, I completely agree with Mike. Go online, look at the titles of the talks, and like pick one of the ones you think would be the most interesting to you, or based on our discussion, pick one of the ones that would be the most interesting to you and read that one first. I do not think if you're on the fence, I would invest the 350 pages and the amount of time into this. I don't think you're going to get your bang for your buck out of it. But that said, I don't think it was a terrible book. Like I don't walk away from this going like, oh man, I wasted a whole bunch of time, regardless of the show and whatever. But I don't think I wasted a whole bunch of time. I think there were some still really good nuggets out of there. And one of those nuggets would be like other people to read. So, like I think there's more in Ben Franklin that I could get out of, Samuel Johnson that I could get out of, Keynes. I didn't know a ton about Keynes, but he quotes Keynes a bunch of different times that like would be interesting to go and read some of that work. So I got a lot of those like places I could dip my toe in as well.
Mm-hmm. So by the way, that name I pronounced, I mispronounced Feynman earlier. I think you pronounced it the right way. I pronounced it the wrong way. That person you're talking about is Keynes, Keynesian economics.
Okay. Yeah, Keynes. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so all of that being said, what is my ranking for this book? I'm going to rank it a 4 as well, with the idea though that like I was interested in Munger. So it's like we could have read any book on Munger, and I'm going to move that rating up a little bit. If somebody read this book and they were like, nope, that book's a 2 or a 3, I couldn't really fight you on that, because you're either interested in what he talks about or you're not. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of in between there. So because I was interested in what he talked about and I wanted to read a book, like I like the idea of reading a book about Munger, it bounces it up to a 4. The thing that knocks it down from like a 5 to me, like the big draw that knocks it down from a 5, is the investing in economics side of it, because that's just less interesting to me. So 4 stars for me on this one.
All right. Well, let's put poor Charlie's Almanack on the shelf. What's next, Cory?
The next book we're going to read is called The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. And this book is kind of an interesting book in terms of it takes the work of a psychologist named Alfred Adler and basically kind of puts it into this different package. So it's dialogue between a philosopher and a young man, and like how they're going to have these conversations, and we're going to learn some things about life direction and past burdens and those type of things. Really, the thing that drove me to this one was it was talked about in another book that we've read, a previous book that we read, and then just the concept in itself, the courage to be disliked, because there's a little bit about me, like there's a little bit of me personally that's like, well, hold on, I don't like to be disliked. Like I want to be liked by other people. So I think this book is going to challenge me in terms of that. So hopefully you'll come along for the ride with us. If you are going to come along for the ride, The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga.
Yes.
How about you, Mike? What's the one after that?
I'm having trouble picking one yet again. I have one here as the default option, but I've heard from people in my community that Make It Stick by Peter Brown, Henry Roediger, and Mark McDaniel is a great book on learning. They actually tagged you and I and said you should totally cover this one. So I'm willing to do that if you want to. Otherwise, I've got the backup listed in the notes. What do you think?
So I, because of that comment in the community, right, was like, okay, Make It Stick's got to go on there. We just got to figure out when to do it. So I'm up for Make It Stick, or I don't know anything about the long game. So you tell me if that's the one that you're really jazzed about.
All right. Well, people can help us pick this book together then. So Make It Stick is another fairly long book. It's 336 pages. So I don't want to pick another book that is just impossible to get through. You're picking the the easy ones lately. The Long Game is by Dory Clark, and this one, the subtitle, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. I've had this one for a while. I feel like this would be very applicable for the bookworm audience. This one's 256 pages. Yeah, I don't know. So I'm going to give you the choice.
Me? You're going to give me the choice.
Yes. Do you want to read another long book, which Ward had recommended that we both read, and is probably great fodder for bookworm, but would be another heavy lift, I think, or something a little bit easier.
Mike, have you ever turned it to the audience and had them provide feedback and pick the book?
I think we've done that once or twice before, but we don't really have a mechanism for people to do that. And also, I'm afraid of, we're definitely gonna get influence recommended to us a bunch if we do something like that. So I'm trying to do a smaller version of that and give two options and let my co-host pick.
No, so that's what I'm saying is, what if my choice is you have The Long Game or you have Make It Stick, and they have to go to Blue Sky and they have to tell me what they want, and then I can pick it that way.
All right, yeah. So you create a poll.
Yeah.
And we'll link to it in the show notes, and people can pick one.
So it's either going to be The Long Game or it's going to be Make It Stick. We'll get it out there. We'll put it in the show notes, and you all can see, or you all can help tell us which book to do. That's going to be fun. Yeah, this is good. I like this.
All right. Got any Gap books?
No, I do not have any Gap books. My Gap books are the academic subjects that I'm teaching right now. So no Gap books.
Yeah, I don't have any Gap books either. And maybe I'll have a Gap book depending on what the audience picks. We'll see.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. If you are a Bookworm Pro supporter, thank you specifically for helping us keep the lights on. We really appreciate that. You can become a Bookworm Pro supporter by going to patreon.com/bookwormfm. $7 a month. You get access to a couple additional feeds, one of which is the bootleg episode where you get the complete unedited version as soon as we're done recording it. There's also a pro feed, which has an ad-free version of the show with an extended segment where today we talked about my shiny new object and bookworm wallpaper. A couple other things that'll be coming to that shortly, but we'll have details hopefully to share in the next episode or two. But again, if you want to support the show financially, we would love to have your support. You can do so at patreon.com/bookwormfm.
And if you're reading along with us, pick up The Courage to Be Disliked, and we'll talk to you next time.